The wind off the wall smelled of old, dry cold, the kind that bit without malice. Jon Snow stood on the parapet in the hour before dawn, when the world became nothing but ink and scraped bone, and watched the valley below empty itself of color. Ghost pressed close to his thigh, a pale shadow with breath steaming in little bursts. The direwolf's eyes glowed like coals waking in ash. He turned the flaked black knife in his gauntlet hand, catching what little light the moon had left. Dragonglass did not hold a polish like steel. It drank the light, kept secrets, and gave back only edges too keen to be honest. When he gripped it, he felt not weight but intent. "You look like a boy with his father's sword," said Dolorous Ed, coming up softly behind him. Even his gloom seemed quieter at this hour. "Only colder. You should be in bed. Or dead. I can never keep straight what we're meant to be." "The cold's to be kept in view," Jon said. "It's the warmth we have to seek. As long as you don't seek it with some turnip farmer's daughter, Lord Commander," Ed said, mournful as ever. "Turnip farmers have the most beautiful daughters, right up until the babe comes and you see which parent he chose to resemble." Ghost flicked an ear but made no sound. Beyond the wall, the forest was a jagged blackness. The moon, nicked like an old coin, sank toward the east. "A raven from White Harbor," Ed offered, his breath a ribbon. "Ships in and out as they can, but the bay's locking early. Wyman Manderley complains that winter's ungenerous. He means the gods, the king, and us, particularly us." Jon closed his hand around the knife until the edge reminded him of itself. "If we can make enough of these," he said, and Ed's dim eyes followed the shape. "We don't have winter alone. We have a way to meet it." "You can't forge glass," Ed said. "I've been told that since I was a boy snatching pies off the sill. Not that anyone ever used the word forge." "Put that down, Ed," they used to say. "Much the same." "Forging's a word for smiths," Jon said. "This needs other hands. The Citadel knows what to do with brittle truths." "You send a letter to them as well?" Ed asked, genuinely surprised. "That's brave. I once wrote a letter to a lord and apologized at the end for having written it, and he still sent back an answer telling me to apologize again." "I sent Sam," Jon said. He could feel the decision's weight still lodged between his ribs, an ache that eased and returned at odd hours. "Old Town listens better to its own." Ed turned, leaning his elbows on the rim of ancient ice, and peered south, as if he might see the honey wine by squinting. "He'll talk them into sense, then, gently while sweating. He carries Eamon's name, and what proof we have." Jon slid the blade back into its wrap. The cloth snagged at the edge and came away with a fine thread, parting silently. "And he knows how much rides on it." "The boy who reads," Ed said and shook his head. "The more I think on it, the more I envy him. In books, everything's written down as if the words are sure of themselves. Out here, even the snow looks uncertain." Jon did not smile. The wind plucked at his hair like a distracted mother. He stood at the wall's edge until the east bruised to gray and the cold sharpened, then turned away. He had sent Sam because Sam had always done the hard thing when asked, even if his hands shook and his breath came in small frightened takes. He had sent Sam because Old Town was far from winter, and men in warmth could be made to listen if a case was brought as carefully as a fine blade. He had sent Sam because Maester Eamon had died with his eyes full of dragons and prophecy and one last unanswered plea. "Help him see," Eamon had said, and though the old man's clouded eyes had been turned to Daenerys in the east, Jon felt the words like a hand pressed to his back, urging him toward something that, if named, might flee. In the rookery, ravens stirred and rustled, whole shelves of wing and eye. The bird that favored Jon leaped awkwardly from perch to perch, a gloom of feathers with a sly light at its core. "Corn," it croaked hopefully. "Not yet," Jon said, easing the latch. "Soon." Ghost slipped past his legs, a whisper of snow moving through shadows. Jon dipped his quill. Letters multiplied like frost on panes. To Manderley and Skagos, to the mountain clans and Bear Island, to Seaworth on whatever tide carried him, To Sir Dennis Mallister at the Shadow Tower and Cotter Pike at Eastwatch, to Stannis, always to Stannis, and to Old Town, where the conclave sat in a ring of tidy skepticism. He set down the plea again, that we may stand, that we may have what helps, that we see farther than our own breath. The maesters would scoff. Some would. He had seen the look enough times to know its family. Pity crossbred with condescension. The others were stories. They were old wives made of ice and wind, and yet obsidian worked. Sam's trembling hand had driven a dragonglass dagger through an ancient's throat, and the thing had come apart like hoarfrost under boot. The blade's black, eating edge. The smell, what smell? And cold. The memory of cold. Help us turn out arrowheads and spear points and binding resins. Help us fashion hafts and mountings so the glass survives the flight. Help us devise what men who do not have magic may carry against what does. He sealed it with the watch's puckered black wax. The impression never came out clean. The wall did not yield a tidy image even on wax. The raven cocked its head, curious, and after he had fed it corn, it took the letter in its clever beak and seemed to regard him as if measuring the madness of distances. "Oh, town," he told it. "Find the warmth." It launched into the dark with a clatter of wings. Alone atop the rookery's stairs, he watched it go, a quick vanishing lump against the lightless sky. Then he turned to the day's lesser battles. Food, tempers, a queen's pride, a priestess's visions, and the memory of glass under his hand stayed like a splinter. Old Town smelled of river and tang of sea, of ink and cheese and warm stone after rain. The high tower's pale mass reared like a finger pointing at a god no one had ever seen. Sam Tarly had loved the idea of Old Town since he was a boy reading by candle to drown out his father's voice. He had loved it as a place the world grew orderly and stored itself on shelves with small white labels. In truth, Old Town was 1,000 little arguments braided into streets, and Sam sweated through each one. He sat in a scriptorium that morning. The light filtered through oiled parchment. All eras the Sphinx sat across from him, long brown fingers idling with an unstrung bow while her eyes slid kindly over his notes. "You're going to drown them in reason," she said, amused. "I only want to be clear," Sam said. He had written and crossed out and written again, and the words looked skittish beneath his hand. "If I tell them what we saw, how we saw, they cannot say they weren't told." "They can," All Eras said cheerfully. "They can do anything, but your words will itch. You have a talent for that." He flushed. The scriptorium smelled of ink and dust and the faint oil that leather left on air. Armin the Acolyte, Armin the Owl they called him, hunched 2 tables over, groaning as he read Peristan on annals and gnawed his lip as if the truth might be hidden in it. Lazy Leo Tyrell dozed upright in a shaft of warm light, the ghost of a smirk on his face. Sam's hands were clean now, ink-stained but free of tar and blood. He had learned to hold a quill without looking as afraid as he felt. He missed John. He missed the honest cold that put fear in your lungs where it could be faced. He missed Gilly and the babe and the tiny clench the world made in his heart whenever he thought of them. Eamon was a kindness inside his chest that had not faded. He put his palm there sometimes and pressed, as if he could keep it from spilling. When he went to Archmaester Ebrose, he carried the dragonglass dagger wrapped in oiled cloth and a letter in John's square hand. Ebrose kept a steady mind and a steady tone. He had a sweet, careful voice like a man soothing a frightened horse. He listened as Sam spoke, and did not interrupt except to ask what might have been kindnesses. "And you're certain of what you saw?" Ebrose said at the end, when Sam's mouth had gone dry and he had to stop. "Yes." The word came out small. Sam did not trust it. "No. Yes, Archmaester. I am." "It killed the other as surely as the sun kills frost." Ebrose nodded to the wrapped dagger. "Let us look." He unfolded the cloth with the tender gravity of a man undressing memory. The dragonglass lay against linen, drinking the light. Ebrose's lined face did not change. He touched the edge very carefully with the pad of his thumb and drew back with a hiss. "Sharp," he said, which any child could have told him. But turning a thing into a word was the first step to owning it. Ebrose liked to own things. "It shatters," Sam said, "if struck wrong. If used like steel, it breaks. Most truths do, said a voice at the door, and Sam did not need to look to know the speaker. Archmaester Marwyn filled a doorway the way a storm filled a horizon. He made the room a different whether by entering. He wore his chain heavy, its links mismatched and reckless. His face was scarred and steady, and his eyes were the color of smoke when the fire beneath is thinking of going out. Ebro's mouth tightened. "We did not send for you, Marwyn." "You did not," Marwyn agreed and came in anyway, his broad hands loose and capable. "But this lad came for me the moment he arrived, and I am more courteous than you are." He looked at Sam, and Sam felt at once comforted and seen through. "You've the look of a man ashamed of the way he breathes, boy. Stop that. It's bad for the blood." Sam found himself smiling helplessly. "Archmaester, do you know what the glass candle shows?" Marwyn asked Ebro's, as if they had been in the middle of a debate that morning and yesterday and for 20 years. "It shows the world's smallness, how near things are that we're accustomed to calling far. It shows the mind that refuses to be bridged by road or sea." He looked back to Sam. "Will you come to my rooms tonight?" Ebro's flinched, almost imperceptibly. "This is the boy from the watch." "He is. He carries more truth than this building does," Marwyn said. "And he's rare enough to know it frightens him." He took up the dragon glass, examined it, and set it down again with a respect that felt genuine. "The boy asks us to set our soft hands to hard work, Ebro's. Can you feel the cold in that request? It's clean. There's very little clean in this city. I will not have you turn the citadel into a dockside fire pit for your pagan experiments," Ebro's said tiredly. "You won't," Marwyn said, "because I will. You'll merely discover it in the minutes and try to vote to make it have not happened afterwards." Alira's laughed. She had come to lean at the door, a bright, spare figure with eyes that missed nothing. Pate lurked past her shoulder, the boy with the not-quite-right smile, who fetched and carried and watched the Archmaesters and never seemed to tire of watching. The Quill and Tankard's Rosie had said Pate was sweet. Sam had thought Pate like a word spelled almost correctly. He had since learned that almost was the difference between a prayer and a curse. "Not pagan. Practical," Marwyn said. "We have men who can learn to shape glass, we have kills and hands and time that we spend polishing flaws out of arguments. The boy brings us a flaw we can wear with honor. He brings us a way to cut." Ebro's ran a long finger along the blade, this time not touching the edge. "If we do this, and I am not saying we do, we must confirm that the tales are true." His eyes lifted to Sam's. "A demonstration."
Sam swallowed.
"There are no others in the Hightower's gardens, Archmaester." "Not demonstrably," Marwyn said, "but there are whites to be had in the Citadel's cool room if one knows which doors open which locks." His smile did not reach his eyes. Walgrave's ravingcraft once included little experiments. Bureaucracy kept them tidily labeled after his wits fled. "Half this city is tidily labeled rot. We can hunt in its basements. I won't be a party to—" Ebro's began, and then stopped, looking pained by his own hypocrisy. "You will, won't you?" "I will," Marwyn said pleasantly. "And you will write a letter to the conclave afterward that makes it sound as if it was their idea last year. Would you like the boy, or shall I?" Ebro's closed his eyes briefly, the way a man did when he sensed a storm going around a house he owned. He nodded. "If we find proof, I shall help you find hands. We will not call it forging. Words matter. We shall call it making," Marwyn said. "And we shall make so many that the others will learn the word hunger from us." He clapped Sam on the shoulder like a man clapping a tree. Tonight, Sam ought to have been terrified, but he felt something other than fear rising in him. It was the feeling he had once had when he had said no to his father and had not been struck. It was too fragile to name. The Hightower's beacon burned by day, though men were used to not seeing it in sunlight. At night it painted the river with long pale fingers. Lord Leighton Hightower and his daughter Malora the Mad Maid were said to have taken to the highest rooms with books of spells that made proper men smile. Sam had learned that most smiles hid teeth. Marwyn's rooms held a candle that did not burn and did not give off heat, and when he lit it the air felt thinner, the way it did when you ran too fast. The glass candle's light had no color. It showed things as if their shadows had been excused. Sam tried not to look too long but found he could not look away. His skin prickled. It felt like standing on a cliff edge and knowing that you had no wish to jump and were going to anyway. "I want you to call him," Marwyn said gently, and it was not a request. "Call the boy at the wall. Find him as you would find a warm stone in your pocket." "I don't know how," Sam said, and heard how childish the words were. "You do," Marwyn said, "because you want to. Want is a kind of road. It's why men are always tripping over it." He put a weight of his hand between Sam's shoulder blades. As if there were wings there, he meant to coax out. "Say his name inside your head until you've eaten it." Sam closed his eyes. He had 100 embarrassments, and they all lined up to be fed. He imagined the cold hurting his teeth. He imagined the sound of the wind on the wall like cloth ripping. He imagined Jon's face, which was difficult because the world always seemed to put other faces over it. Ned Starks and Robb Starks and Rhaegars. Men Sam had seen only in tapestries. Jon was not those men. Jon had a way of looking at you that suggested he'd watched himself come apart already and didn't mind if you did it in front of him. Sam said the name in his mind until it lost meaning. Then, like a song you thought forgotten that returns when your hands fall into the old motions, it meant more. The room stretched, felt like a hand closing. Jon stood in a narrow lane of brightness that had no source and every source. He felt the wind, and did not feel it, and saw a candle that did not shed light the way candles shed light. He closed his eyes on instinct that felt useless and then opened them to the sense of someone breathing who had held his breath too long. "Jon!" Sam's voice came from the candle, came from his own heart beating. "I'm here," he said, because he was, though all the words felt clumsy.
Sam.
Marwyn's voice moved around Sam's like a river under ice. "Ask him a question you could not have contrived an answer to." "Lord Commander," Sam said, and Jon heard the respect carefully placed in the title like a stone on a cairn. "What did Dolorous Ed say to you this morning that made you look at the knife and not smile? I saw you in your head with it in your hand." Jon thought of the damp thread snagged on the blade's edge. "He said turnip farmers have the most beautiful daughters." Sam laughed, and there was water in it, relief and salt. "I couldn't know that," he told Marwyn. "I couldn't." "No," Marwyn said, pleased. "Now tell him what I want, boy."
Sam straightened.
"Jon, we're going to try. If we can make as many as you asked, if we can make more, we will. We'll need obsidian. We'll need ships. The Hightower might. Lord Leighton is interested. He didn't throw us in the river. That seems hopeful." Behind Jon, in Castle Black's dark, a night's worth of demands stirred and shifted, the restless body of duty. He felt a sudden lightness he did not trust. "We can get obsidian," he said. "Dragonstone, if Stannis will allow it. If he won't, perhaps there are ways. Skagos has rock enough, the earth there eats blades. The Eastwatch cliffs are old fire in places. And I would set the free folk to cutting. They've napped better arrowheads than any Southron I've seen. I'll need to write the Manderleys and the Sistermen for ships. If the Hightower helps." Alaris's voice came, faint as a smile. "If the Hightower helps, old men will invent the word prudence to contain their fear." Marwyn's hand pressed between Sam's shoulders again. "Enough for now. The mind tires like muscle under load." The light from the candle found a way to dim without going out. Sam sagged into a chair. Marwyn's shadow stretched against the wall as if deciding whether to climb. "We will make a speech. For the conclave," he said to Sam. "Ebrose will smooth it. I will tear it at the parts where it's too meek. Then we'll go into the cellars." In the cool room beneath the citadel, the air held a sweetness that had nothing to do with sugar. It was the sweetness of meat thinking it had gotten away with something and being wrong. The place was a city of shelves. Marwyn's key turned and a door shrugged open as if bored. What lay beyond made Sam's breath go shallow. The thing on the slab had been a man. The hands had been hands. The hair lay against a scalp that had the wrong color, like apples kept too long. Its eyes were sewn shut. Its chest was a geography he didn't want to travel. He knew it would not move. He reminded himself several times. Walgrave had ideas, Marwyn said softly, about teaching ravens to mimic not just words but meaning. He thought perhaps the animated might carry messages the living could not be trusted with. You look as if you would like to be sick. So would the truth most days. He held up one of Sam's arrowheads, made at the fist, bound with brittle old resin into an old shaft that had seen snow and fear. We need only ask a small question and accept a large answer. Ebrose looked green, and Sam wished briefly and uncharitably that the sight comforted him more than it did. Do it, the Archmaester said, and his voice had a scrape to it. Marwyn broke the old thread binding the corpse's ankles. He murmured something low, very low, a pressure of sound more than sound, and the hairs on Sam's arms rose. For a heartbeat a movement passed under the skin of the thing's chest, and he had to put his hand to his mouth. Ebrose flinched. Marwyn drove the dragonglass down. It did not go in the way steel goes in because the body offered different truths, but it went in. The air seemed to sigh, quick and relieved. The movement stopped. The smell of cold. Cold had a smell. John had been right. Moved through the room and was gone. The dragonglass came away with a small wet sound. Marwyn nodded, businesslike, as if a sum had balanced. Ebrose swallowed. Twice. All right, he whispered. All right. He did not fight in the conclave. He guided. He led questions softly to their answers, and when the older men tried to swell with their own full certainty, he let them spill themselves out like sacks and refilled them with fact. Marwyn did not speak until it was time to be rude, and then he was rude with art. They did not say yes. They said perhaps, which in Old Town was a word with the exact weight of yes, provided you took it where it needed to go. The Hightower agreed to lend funds and a hall and permits, which were both blessing and chain. The guilds grumbled until the silver made a particular sound and then found grievances they could bear. Glassblowers sniffed. Knappers sniffed more expertly. A man from the Summer Isles taught the apprentices the knack of pressure flaking with antler tines. A man from Liss showed them how to cut with copper saws under water without waking the stone into shards. They ground edges with abrasive sand until the black glass bit back. A woman from the Rainwood, whose grandmother had taught her what she'd learned from a shipwrecked child of Valyria, showed them how to make pitch glue from pine resin, ash, and a sliver of beeswax so the mountings held in cold. All eras shot straw bundles in the practice yard until the Fletchers learned that dragonglass did not love a heavy hand. Not forging, Ebrose muttered whenever anyone said it. Making. If there must be poetry, call it that. Making's a kind of worship, Marwyn said. Let the word be blessed. Sam found himself useful, which surprised him every morning. He wrote letters and kept lists that grew new heads when cut. He carried crates and learned not to drop the weight of them into his knees. He learned to lace obsidian knife blades into bone handles with rawhide that shrank when it dried, and he learned that obsidian edges were not tamed. They were corded. He bled often, shallowly, and carries of little plasters bloomed on his fingers like awkward flowers. A boy broke a blade with a heavy wrist and burst into tears, expecting beating. Marwyn only stacked the broken pieces into a bowl to be reground and said, "Good, you learned something true. Keep the points. We'll set them in clubs." Ebrose came to stand quietly by Sam and watch with a face like a garden wall. "There's sense in this," he said, to himself as much as to anyone else. "The sense is ugly. That means it's real." When the first 100 crates were filled, all eras took her bow and a sheaf of bolts and went with Sam to the river, where the Hightower's steward had gathered men and boats. A small crowd came to the quay because the city understood spectacle. The beacon burned pale. "We do this in daylight," Ebrose said briskly. "We're not here to horrify fishwives." "What then?" Lazy Leo had sauntered down, yawning. "To terrify iron-born spies? Do you think they sleep, Armin? They sleep on piles of stolen girls and stolen cups, like dragons." "We will need ships," Sam said, ignoring Leo with effort. "The Manderleys will help, but the Tyrells must open the mouth of the Mander. The Iron Fleet takes what it wants off the shields. If Euron sees what we carry, he will come for it. He will come whether he sees or not, all Yrsa said. Her smile had that bright, distant quality it got when she was thinking of some game other people did not know yet they were playing. Better to have him looking where we choose. Lord Leighton has ships. Lord Leighton has pride. They like to do difficult things together. Lord Leighton did not leave the tower, but his son did, and his daughter more than his son. Malora came down with hair like a wild map and eyes that made men step carefully. She looked at the crates as if they were interesting books. "What else do we send north?" she asked Sam, and he loved her for asking. "Grain," he said. "Good cordage. Horn and
Dibun.
strong wine. The watch needs to feel its hands. And a few good smiths, but those we should send to Eastwatch to learn the glues and lacing. Let the work travel faster than the men." She nodded, delighted. "Yes, teach the learning to go like the plague goes. There are enough deaths in the world. Let it be the useless ways that die." When the first ships took the river for the Hightower's docks, Sam stood with his hands laced, the way he had when he was a child and wanted to keep them in sight lest they do something foolish. The barges sat low with weight. The crates were stenciled with the watchful eye of the conclave, which meant nothing and everything. All Yrsa's, brave and curious, had carved a small raven into the wood by Sam's insistence as if to teach the gods what direction to look. 2 days later, a letter came from White Harbor, and Marwyn made Sam read it aloud twice for the pleasure it put on his scarred face. Wyman Manderly's hand spooled across the page in generous, hungry loops. He would lend ships. He would lend men. He would do it for the watch which guarded his suppers from things that did not care to sit at tables. And if a few crates should be lost to the wolves of the sea, Lord Wyman wrote, the sea will not like what its wolves cough up. Davos Seaworth's name came inked smaller at the bottom in the hand of a man who knew his work and preferred to be done with it. He was at White Harbor and would go where bidden, provided he could see a road in the ice. Sam kissed the page before he could think how foolish it would look, then blushed his way out of the room. John's letter came a week later, spattered in a corner as if by a candle that had only just learned how to burn. He spoke of Stannis, who was winter-dressed as a man. The king would allow digging on Dragonstone if he was brought stone and promise and a thing that sounded to John like the nearest he got to a blessing. He spoke of the free folk at the long tables, learning to bind and cut, mocking and then admiring themselves for it. He spoke of Melisandre looking into fires and finding a city built of pages and bones, which could only be Oldtown. He spoke of loneliness, but not as a burden. "It's a quality of light," John wrote. "I'm learning to read by it." Sam read that line 3 times, and the space behind his ribs loosened and ached. Ships left Oldtown with shallow drafts full of the black and the rapt and the careful. It felt like sending pieces of night north by river and sea. The Ironborn watched. Of course they did. They crouched off the shields with their salt stink and their dirty laughter, and Wyman Manderly's boats learned to go in convoy with Hightower galleys that wore sunlight like armor. Once, off South Shield, the Iron Fleet took a bite regardless, a mouthful of 1 barge and 3 men who ought to have had long years, and all that was left of the barge after the teeth of it was a dark glittering smudge on the water where broken edges sang softly in the chop. Word came in a gull's feather letter that the Ironborn had recovered 3 crates that day. In truth, they recovered 1, and when the men pried it open in hunger for curiosity and plunder both, the inner lids had been painted with a thin layer of powdered obsidian set in pitch. The first pry was always the deepest. Euron Greyjoy's men learned that dragonglass had more edges than a knife does. Some of those men put their hands into their mouths like children, hoping that would help. It did not. Oldtown went about its business because cities always did even while they burned. Sam woke to bells some mornings and lay there a moment sorting whether they were ordinary alarms about ordinary fires or the kind that sound when black sails are seen. The Hightower's beacon burned regardless. The quill and tankard grew louder at night, voices asking what their masters would not. Pate served and watched and returned Sam's thanks with the smile that did not seem to belong to his face. Sometimes Sam followed the boy with his eyes until the shadow of him bent away into shadow and was gone. "Keep near all Yrsa's," Marwyn said to him one noon without preamble. When the world is about to change, the old gods send observant girls to shepherd the boys who will be late. What about the men who will be early? All eras asked, loosing a bare shaft and then a fletched one in rapid whispering succession from an unstrung bow she was not meant to draw in a hall. Both found the post. Who shepherds the men who run to meet their mistakes? Their sisters, Marwyn said dryly. When the second convoy reached White Harbor intact and letters began to return written by men who had cut others down, men whose names were new in the world's mouth, Old Town began to believe the way men do when belief and self-interest lie decently together. Cotter Pike wrote his short and grim and salted with words that bled. He had taken a ship to the bays near Hardhome and brought back 3 boats full of children and 2 full of women and men and a boat full of silence that had once been laughter. Glass kills them. He had written as if he suspected the world would only trust him if he kept it to one sentence. Send more. John wrote separately, and Sam sat with Ambrose and Marwyn to read. We've learned to make arrowheads that flex enough to live through flight, John wrote. The nappers among the free folk showed us to cut from the cores this way and not that, and to score the bases so the pitch takes more like a neighbor than a guard. The first bolts shattered even when they hit anything but snow. We're bracing the sockets now with metal collars. It feels like a trick, the sort of city man thinks of, which makes the thens laugh. But it works. Stannis had stood in the yard with a dragonglass blade and put it through a dead thing with terrible efficiency. He believes more now, John added. That is not the same as easy. A week later, as if the world wanted to instruct him in the difference between belief and its shadow, a raven hammered its way into the rookery at Castle Black with a letter tied so tight it had nearly cut its own leg off. John opened it because command left little room for hesitation. The letters were stark neat, but not Ned's. They were a woman's hand under discipline. Celis Baratheon wrote to forbid. You will mistake yourself if you think to fill my husband's island with beggars and cut stones. She had written, cold and incurious. We serve the Lord of Light. Your heathen glass has nothing to do with our God. Melisandre had written, however, beneath in an ink the color of old flame. The glass the boy asks for is a rod in the hands of light, she had put. And even the blind know the shape of a staff if they are afraid to fall. John smiled, despite himself. He could see Melisandre writing beside the queen, the words like smoke that refused to be turned aside. Stannis himself wrote then, in a letter whose quills had died for their honesty. John could hear him in the scratch. I will not have my island plundered, the king wrote, nor my garrisons distracted by this fad, but I will send men with picks to bring up stone. You will have it if you make it needful. Needful is stronger than lawful. I have learned this among snow. That was as close to a blessing as winter gave. Hardhome put the new blades into the world's mouth, whether it liked the taste or not. John had not meant to go. The watch needed him at the wall more than the bay needed him in a boat. But when the ravens came clawing at the morning with one message layered over another, thin black wings ridden to pieces by bad weather and worse news, he counted men and decided to err. Between him and Cotter Pike there was respect anchored in dislike. He sent Dolorous Ed with him. He sent a crate of the smallest knives and the shortest spearheads, the ones the Eastwatch smiths laughed at and used anyway. He sent Tormund with his great laugh and his great heart. He went himself. The bay upon which Hardhome sulked had the look of a thing choosing to forget. Rot lay near the waterline in strips, and the cold turned fish into brittle coins. The settlement had been a nest of low roofs and refusal. Now it had all the insistence of smoke. John watched the first ranks of whites come without hurry. They did not pant. They did not blink. They did not tire of cheering for their own deaths. Another moved at their back as a child will run behind a dog to make it feel brave. It rode cold instead of a horse. The cold rode everything. Loose, John said tightly, and the first volley went up black and true and came down with an odd sound when the obsidian met the things it had been made for. It was not a metal sound. It had its own small silence in it. A white broke apart at the chest, not with gore so much as with a dismissal. A man near John sobbed once, hard as a man who had held his child's dead hand might sob. then went about the next task with meticulous fingers. Beside him, Alaraz's lessons lived in the hands of men and women who had never seen a summer islander. Bolts made a soft breaking sound when their precious points found old wood. The black flights of arrows darkened the gray light. Tormund roared something that would have been obscene if it did not sound so much like love. One of the others came closer, as if it found human tumult educational. It lifted the thin remnant of a smile that was not on its face so much as in the air near it. It held a blade that caught daylight and cut it to ribbons. It pushed at the future with the tip of that blade. Jon went to meet it because there was nothing else to do. He had a sword that had taken vows with him. He had a knife of black glass he had tucked into his belt because men do foolishly careful things in the mornings before they know what the day will be. The sword rang against the other's weapon with the sound of a broken bell. The cold came into his mouth and made a home there. He drew the knife. He was faster than he was strong. He had learned to be. The other moved the way a swallow thinks. Jon got a hand in that thought and pushed a little. Just enough. The dragonglass kissed where an ear would be if the thing had been made for listening. The other became a crack through which a scream was trying to leave the world and could not find the door. Then it was gone, unmade, and the air rushed in a long dry hum that felt like it had wanted to do that for 1,000 years. He looked at the knife. The edge had taken a new, smaller chip. It seemed pleased with itself. He laughed then, abruptly and helplessly, because he could not have found another answer to any question anyone asked him. He did not notice the blood on his palm until later. They brought back more boats than they'd thought they would, and less. Jon saw a girl with hair the color of the ice over deep water take an old man's hand and climb into a future she did not trust. He saw Tormund carrying 2 children as if they were logs with teeth, and he was not sure which end to bite first. He saw Cotter Pike stop to lift a woman out of the cold with the same hands with which he had once lifted a cask of brine. He saw what he had asked the world to risk. He knew he would ask again. When the news reached Old Town through 2 candles and the ordinary road, the conclave wrote letters that made urgent noises. Ebrose contained 2 words. "It works," was all. "More," was the second. Marwyn laughed when he read them. He laughed like a man who didn't do it often and had to remember where to place the sound. They made more. They taught men from White Harbor how to make the glues and the lashings and the bracings so that when the making ran thin in Old Town, the making would thicken elsewhere. The guilds stopped sniffing. The high tower hung a flag that had not flown in years, which meant something Sam was too new to the city to understand, but which made men stand taller when they passed it. Malora came to the hall and stood among the blades and said, "My father is reading a book with no words. It frightens him. He likes it." Pate watched. Sam wondered what he wrote inside his heart with his eyes. He saw the boy put a hand to the keys at his belt, sometimes with a speculative touch, as if the weight of them had told him a story. He tried to be kinder to the boy for how he looked. He tried to remember that pity was a mind's way of feeding itself sweet things and that the truth might be hungrier. When the Ironborn came to the Mander's mouth with 5 ships fresh painted and sagging with stolen confidence, they cut a war galley nearly to the bone before the shore batteries learned how to aim. One of their ships ran afoul of a spit of shoal that was cleverer than it looked. Men cheered, and the sound was like a dog breaking into song. The Ironborn went away along the coast to look for softer throats. Davos Seaworth stood on a pier and watched them with a face like a table. When he spoke, his voice had the flat quality of a man selling an idea he would buy at twice the price. "Greyjoy will come for what he cannot use," he said to Lord Leighton's son. "He'll think we're foolish for carrying stones. He's a thief. Thieves think everything breaks the way doors do. Keep your lights up." He raised his chin at the high tower. "Keep the beacon burning day and night so the sea sees better than it wants to." Malora clapped her hands at that and skipped 3 steps in a circle, a woman whose thoughts were bigger than her feet. Sam wrote and wrote. Letters to Jon, to White Harbor, to Deepwood Motte and Barrowton and Bear Island. Letters to men who had hated the watch their whole lives and had to learn a new word for it now that the watch was carrying the edge of the night to them. Letters to men who prayed fancy and to men who didn't pray. He wrote until his wrists ached, and then he stood and lifted baskets of raw stone until his back made its old complaint. He slept and woke and dreamed that he had been turned into a quill and hadn't. He stood on the river stairs one evening with all ears and watched a barge so heavy it rode barely below the water move out under a sky like cold gray honey, and all ears said, "I like days like this. It feels as if the world is lifting something with you." He found Pate there, leaning on a post, watching the same water with a face that did not appear to belong to Old Town. "I want to help," Pate said, not turning. "I can carry. I can run messages without eating them."
Sam smiled.
"Come in the mornings," he said, and Pate's mouth twitched into his nearly right smile. "Come when the sun slants and men lie. We need a spy who listens with clean ears." Pate nodded, and the nod was wrong. The friend Sam had made in the tavern had taught him to see. He made excuses to himself as if that would help. All ears watched him watching Pate, and said nothing. John's days turned flintier. A woman stabbed a woman at Castle Black over turnips. A man refused to sleep under the same roof with 3 hard homeboys because their eyes looked too old. John put him under the same roof and sat there himself for a week until the man learned that fear wasn't a wage you could pay others with. Celis men sulked when the Red Woman smiled at the Hightower's shadow. Stannis wrote again and again in a voice that seemed to be carving itself down to a single, bare sentence the way winter carves a river. "Needful," the letters said, as if that were not a word but a shape pressed into ice. All the while crates came. Eastwatch began to look like a place that had resolved to become a storage room for the night's scarcest commodity. Men learned to treat the knives as if they were a species you must be kind to lest it go extinct. Black fletchings grew in the hands of boys who had never made anything. John watched a then show a boy from Molestown the way to push the flake off the core without anger. It made him think of smoother words for the world than the world had for itself. On a clear night with stars at such attention that the sky looked scolded, the alarm bell shook the stones at the wall's foot. Men ran and did not shout. The cold came hopping like a trap that had been sprung. Out in the white, shadows moved with the stiff, dumb grace of bad decisions. John took a ladder up onto the parapet and found that his fingers had gone to claws on the rungs without asking him. The others came as if the cold had decided to wear limbs. They did not come with banners because banners are declarations, and the cold makes no declarations. It simply arrives. "Loose," John said, and the word lifted wings. The noise that woke then was new in the world only because the world had gone so long without it. Obsidian at speed becomes an idea with weight. It cut what had thought that edges belonged only to men. The first rank of whites fell as if they had been waiting to be allowed to. The second walked malevolently through their dissolving and came on. The first of the others to climb the ice wall with their strange, calm hands met a flurry of short knives on thongs in the fists of men who could not afford to throw and lose. The black edges bit and then were quiet. When an other dies, it is as if you discover a room has always been too small. 2 hours or a year later, the cold lifted a little, and the night breathed. One came back to the yard carrying 3 men whose hearts still had not decided one way or another. Tormund swore an oath so extravagant it sounded like poetry. John stood where he was until his legs remembered what legs do, and then went down the stairs and walked the yard and spoke the small sentences that men with blood on them require to go on living. He washed his hands and did not notice that they were bleeding until the water went pink and then clear again. After, in the rookery's thin quiet, he lit a glass candle that he had sent from Old Town disguised in a crate marked clamps and L. Art. He had not meant to do that which Marwyn asked because it felt like a trespass. He did it now because the air inside him wanted it. He said Sam's name inside the flame until it became a taste. Sam's voice came as if it had been hidden behind a door someone had suddenly remembered was not locked. "John," he said. It was not a question. "Are you?" "I am," John said. He could see the sheen of sweat on Sam's upper lip as clearly as if the room were a step away. He could see Alara's shoulder beyond. The curve of her bow hung on pegs above her bed, the disorder of 2 hours' sleep. We held. Sam put a hand to his eyes and took it away. Old Town rang 9 bells for a fire near the river, he said. as if that were the counterweight to what John had said. It was nothing. The guild burned a pot of pitch. It smelled like bad memory. I killed one with my own hand, John said, surprised still to hear himself speak in a voice that held such a quiet admission. It is not a deed. It is a task. I will do it again if I have the knife. Sam nodded very slowly. We are still making, he said. Ibroz told the conclave today that their reluctance now will be remembered later in the histories as caution that nearly killed us. He said if they wanted to be virtuously late again, they could go wait in the starry September until the gods recorded them generous. He said it very sweetly. They blushed. The candle trembled, though there was no breath on it. John felt not cold, but something like the idea of it passing by. He glanced toward the trapdoor at the rookery's end. Ghost sat at the top of the stairs with his mouth open a little, panting without hurry. The dire wolf had blood on his muzzle. He had found time that night to remind the world what shaped it. I hear steps, Sam said suddenly low. John. Pate came through Marwin's door behind Sam with a smoothness that belonged to someone else. He held his hat in his careful hands. Marwin stood with his back to the candle, as if he had asked for his own shadow. All eras straighten the way a bowstring settles when it is told there will be music. I have a message for the Archmaester, Pate said. In that pleasant voice he had that sounded so very nearly like a boy carrying just enough shyness to make him useful to bad men. From a friend of the Citadel. Do you? Marwin said without turning. Pate set the hat on the table and tipped it. The key fell out. It was one of the Citadel's old ones, notched and twisted in a way that made it look like some animal that had survived long winters by being less than appetizing. Pate's face changed. Something else put it on. It smiled with clean confidence. You aren't Pate, Sam heard himself say, before he thought to not say it. You wear him like a... He could not find the word. He suddenly thought of Alaraz's macabre little game of shooting fruit balanced on heads and felt sick. I am what he bought with his heart, the Not Pate said lightly, and picked up the key. The world is opening. He looked at the candle, and the look had in it that mild disdain you see in a butcher when he admires a vegetarian's shoes. The glass will bring fire where no one asked for it. Marwin turned then. He had a sort of stillness that did not belong to men who laughed easily. We know who you serve, he said. Or partly. We know you serve what you don't know you serve. You do not cook alone, boy. The Not Pate's smile did not reach its eyes. We never do, he said. He slipped the key away. Tell your Lord Commander to keep his knives bright and his ravens fat. Tell him the sea will darken with wings he did not intend. Tell him a king is dreaming in a drowned place. He picked up the hat and with it the memory of Pate, put both back on, and left the room with the step of a boy who did not deserve what he was going to be. After, Sam sat very still while the candle made silence. All Eras put her hand on the knife at her belt as if considering what a sound might look like when cut into pieces small enough to not trouble anyone. Marwin stood with his back to the light until his shadow grew bored and went elsewhere. They're watching, he said. Of course they are. The brave thing about bringing light to a dark room is that you can suddenly see the predators. Let them look. It will teach them a new sadness. John's own watchers wore black, and their sadness was old. They became smaller in his mind in those days and then larger. They were always the size of men holding knives behind their backs and arguments in their mouths. He felt the pink letters' words tear the air. He listened to men say he was breaking the watch by saving it. He listened to men who had never thrown their lives at anything argue that he was throwing other men's lives too hard. He walked through that narrow corridor like a man carrying wide objects. The forging saved him in ways none of them had expected. Men who would have put blades in his back the night before put blades on shafts instead because their hands had new work. Men who wanted to complain at dinner fell exhausted across blankets without time to poison their rest. The smell of pine pitch squeezed itself into the watch's nights until even their dreams stuck to the findings of the day. The free folk laughed at the Southerners' soft hands and then noticed that the hands were less soft, and found new things to mock that kept their mouths too busy for sharp words. Stannis watched all this with a face carved from old law. When he came to the yard, he would sometimes touch a blade of dragonglass and wipe his hand carefully afterward, as if he had been holding the handle of a pot while it was on the fire. "Needful," he said once to John across a table with a map on it. "Everything else waits. We'll be hated by those we save. That's how salvation buys itself." John had never wanted salvation. He wanted to stand on a wall and keep a promise. He nodded anyway. "We should winter supplies farther forward," he said. "Oh, outposts with men who know how to use what we're making." Stannis's mouth did not change. "Your boy from Old Town," he said, as if Sam were a species. He proved the glass with a dead piece of insolence. "So Marwyn said," John answered. "The proof holds." "As long as he does," Stannis said dryly. "I had a court once. It taught me that proof is a thing that can be killed. Try to bind it." They bound it with letters and with crates and with the living hands of men who taught other men. Sam tucked his quill behind his ear and went down to the hall and learned to press rawhide so it shrank as if it had a soul that wanted to hug. He went to the river steps at dawn with all eras, and they watched barges with new guards empty of men with old fear fill up with something else. He watched Malora laugh at a Your Grace who had never been taught to listen to girls who got their hands dirty. He watched Marwyn decide which of the truths in front of him were worth keeping and which would slow the work, and he watched a bro sigh and write minutes as if the act of putting words in the right order could stitch new skin over an old wound. He wrote John letters that were more like talking than letters. He wrote, and the glass candle made them into a different kind of speech sometimes, the kind that held breathing. John wrote back that Ghost never took his eyes off the base of the wall anymore when the night was very quiet, and he had the feeling the direwolf was counting. John wrote back that he had woken with frost on his blanket one morning though the fire had not gone out, and he had the feeling cold was learning to walk indoors. Sam wrote to Wyman Manderley in crabbed little lines that nevertheless seemed to please the Lord. He asked Davos questions he had not dared to ask his own father. Davos answered kindly, in ink that had patience in it. "I spent years knowing what the sea would take and hoping it would not take me," Davos wrote once. "Now I spend them knowing what the night wants and hoping the day helps. The work is honest. Keep your courage on the table where you can see it." When Euron came at last for Old Town with a fleet that looked like a thought the sea had been nursing, he did not know what he had come to steal. He burned 2 ships in the mouth of the Mander and cut 3 more across the belly for the pleasure of watching them bleed out. His men sang a salt song and thought themselves up to mischief. The Hightower's beacon burned so white that night that men said they saw their bones through their own hands. On the quays, all eras and 30 apprentices with quick fingers sent a cloud of bolts into a press of men, and though the Ironborn laughed at first when the first points shattered on wet wood, they laughed less when the points that did not shatter found skull and stringy neck. Davos kept the galleys in a line that looked casual and wasn't. Malora lit pots of pitch along certain walls that poured light down into water the color of iron. The Ironborn learned that dragonglass had more than one way to cut. They took a second bite and threw up blood and rode away, spoiled for softer meals. "Send them a letter," Marwyn told Sam afterward, glowing with an old rude joy. "Tell them thank you. Tell them we needed practice." Sam wrote it and sealed it and watched a boy take it with serious hands. He wondered if somewhere a pale man with eyes like the ocean under drowning looked at a piece of parchment and felt an emotion and did not know its name. The thought pleased him more than it should have. He did not tell Ambrose. The winter laid itself down like a law. The crates became part of commas in the sentences men wrote to each other to mean survival. The knives became ordinary in the way extraordinary things do when they stay. The bows sang their simple songs. The pitch glue stank like truth. The glass candle burned when the boys who should have been sleeping made excuses, and the air that touched it felt like the future being unreasonable. On a night when the stars had decided to rest and the sky was a wool blanket with no pattern, John went out to the top of the wall and found Melisandre standing with her hands out as if she were measuring the cold with them. She did not turn when Ghost came, and that in itself was curious. Her red eyes looked at a horizon the dark had erased. "The night you think you own," she said without greeting. "You have made a bully of it." "I've given men knives," John said. "We have always had knives. We've made better ones. The night will have to learn to mind them. That is a kind of prayer, the Red Woman said, and smiled, thin and without pity. You have become a stubborn prayer. She tilted her head, listening to a music he couldn't hear. A black ship with a very old horn is sailing east, she went on. A king without a crown is dreaming in the waves. A city that teaches men to forget names is remembering one it had on a day before it was born. She lowered her hands. The air did not appreciably warm. Your boy in Old Town is watched by a many-faced hunger. He will not be eaten if he remembers he is not food. Sam is food for no one, John said, surprised into heat. He has more to him than men think. He has courage covered over. He serves. Service is a fire, Melisandre said. It uses and it gives. Be careful where you set yours. Fires are not loyal. Only those who keep them are. She glanced then at the candle he had hidden in the rookery, as if she had seen it through the stones. That is not my God's flame, she said almost gently. But it is a flame anyway. You will not hear me argue. We are at table with a hunger that does not listen to the names of gods. He should have felt relief. He felt something like a door closing a little more snugly in a winter house. We need more, he said, and could not tell if he meant knives or men or faith. He meant all of them, probably, and something else he did not know how to say. You will have it, she said. The world is going to give you a great deal you do not want. Some of it will be the right thing. Most of it won't. She touched his sleeve with 2 fingers that were warmer than the night and then left without leaving footprints he could see. Ghost watched her go as one watches a weather change that has not yet decided what it. They rode in carts piled with things that had never yet seen hard weather and learned that wood that had never been cold had a sound it made when it broke that the warm world had not taught them. They learned to be afraid. They learned that fear has a better memory than courage and so must be argued with daily. They learned to cut their own meat and to sleep doggedly and to keep their hands warm. They learned to make the making part of the watch's breath. What they carried to the wall was more than knives. It was the sense that when the world refutes you loudly you must sometimes answer with quiet persistence. It was the sense that the South had decided to give the North what it asked for, not as charity, but as recognition at last that what happens at the top of the world does not stop in the snow. It becomes a river and goes to sea. John stood with Ghost at the top of the wall and watched the winter make its slow considerations. He thought of a boy with a glass candle and a hand that shook, who had gone south because he had been asked, and because he knew he could be useful. He thought of the kid in white stone rooms making knives that would never know his name. He thought of all eras with her quick fingers and bright eyes and how she taught men twice her size to handle sharp edges without bringing the blood out of themselves. He thought of an old man dying with a dragon's name in his mouth and of a king with a mouth like a punishment learning to say needful with a new reverence. He thought of a woman with red eyes who had looked at his future and had not laughed. Below him, the yard of Castle Black moved with a certain industry. Men found purpose like a bit of hot bread. They set shafts in sockets. The pitch glue ached and cooled. Fletchings brushed against sleeves and left no mark. What they were making did not look like salvation. It looked like work. Ghost leaned against his knee, and John put a hand into the direwolf's thick ruff and felt the warmth there, and the pulse. The wind came up the face of the wall then, and it could not help but be itself, and he could not help but be himself. He had brought the South to the North in boxes, carried along a river that no one remembered had ever mattered in this way before. He had asked a city that made books to make edges. He had asked the skeptical to become craftsmen of a different truth. He had asked men to believe in work instead of in hope. The night will always arrive, he thought. That is not a threat. That is a calendar. And when it comes it will find men standing, their hands full of sharp, honest things. It will find the making of the South carried north on the backs of those who were taught too late to be cynical. It will find a boy named Sam who couldn't lift his father's anger lifting a city's doubt instead. It will find that if you build a narrow bridge and ask the brave to cross, they will, shaking, crying, singing, cursing, carry what must be carried. Behind him the bell at the yard rang once, steady as a heartbeat. A party of stragglers had been seen moving through the pines, stumbling toward a gate, they had never believed in and needed anyway. John looked south, toward a city of spires and arguments, and felt across all the miles the warmth of the candle that should not burn. He said Sam's name in his head without asking for an answer. It came anyway, a soft human breath put into the darkness like a gift someone had forgotten to wrap. "John," the breath said. "We're here," John answered, to the breath, to the wind, to the men below him, to the night thinking its old thoughts on the far side of a wall that had been made by men who had intended something good and large. "We're here."